Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of What's Next with V. This episode is part of the podcast series we're doing in collaboration with iSPIRT. Today we have a really special guest. We have Mr. Hari Subramanian, who is the founder at niti.ai and a volunteer at iSPIRT. Welcome, Hari.
Hey Vishal, thanks for having me on your podcast. Wonderful to meet you as well as all of your viewers.
Awesome. Likewise, I'm Vishal Ramaswamy, your host as always, the V in What's Next with V. Hari, jumping right in. Quite an interesting profile. At the same time, quite a standard profile. You did your engineering in India, moved to the US for your master's. Like many Indians, kind of you had a quite a established career in the US. Worked at some top firms there on the engineering side, and obviously then you came back to India. Obviously, we'll discuss that later, but I'm sure listeners would like to know your journey from being an engineer, doing your master's in the US, working at top firms. Be good to hear your story thus far.
Sure. Thanks for having me again. Like you said, I think uh, my career and background has been to some extent somewhat of a standard one, right? That people aspire to go to the US,
True.
the land of opportunities, the land of dreams, and that's what I pursued. I was an engineering graduate in India. Uh, Grew up in a very small town in a middle class family, which is also a very standard thing to say. But I think the phenomenal thing that actually has happened in India as economic prosperity just has taken all of the a lot of people that are middle class forward, right? Which is a great thing to have experienced in the last 2 decades.
True.
Went to the US, got my master's degree, was actually lived all over in the US. In the Midwest, in Kansas, is where I actually got my master's degree. Then lived in Seattle for a while. My first, really early job was actually at VMware. I was a kernel developer, programming the Linux kernel and working on the TCP/IP in the networking stack. And there is a connection to that I'll draw later to what I do right now at iSPIRT, right? Not very conventional, but unconventional connection. Moved VMware was one of these firms that really built infrastructure software for the large data centers, right? So it was a great experience there, working with some of the sharpest minds in the industry that build operating systems. Then there was the whole shift to cloud that happened in the enterprise data center.
Correct.
And
Yep.
one thing that I've always done in my life is just chased learning. So I really gone to places where there were very smart people and just liked hanging out with smart people, right? And that has been the biggest, I would say, a decision that worked well for me. So went to Amazon Web Services, which was the best place to do cloud if you want to do cloud at all.
True.
And was spent about 4 years at AWS. That time is when I also moved to the Bay Area, where a lot of the tech action seemed to be happening. And that similar quest actually took me to Uber. Right? Uber also was a leader in the consumer internet space at a time where I had done a lot of infrastructure, software, platforms. I really wanted to experience what was consumer internet companies like, and Uber was one of those. It's one of those verbs that redefined uh, uh, our everyday lives, right? So,
True.
and the Uber product is a very interesting and agile product, right? So Uber really builds digital at scale. The app, I'm not sure if you have sort of thought about this, but essentially the app is a single binary, right? A single one app for every region, and but it's highly customized for the regions and the cities that it operates in. Uber actually
Oh,
operates in over
wow.
100 plus countries, over 7,000 cities. At scale, it's actually impossible to build the app for each city, right? So if you go from Bangalore and then say travel to San Francisco, it's the same binary and the same app that works. But the city and the business teams essentially get to customize the app for various use cases, core use cases like onboarding, fraud, risk, marketing, growth, customer support, and both the front end, back end, and the policies, soups to nuts. The business teams actually get to customize how the app behaves for every user. And that was a platform that I built at Uber along with several others. And Arvind, who's my co-founder at Niti, we actually built aspects of what we call the product platform, which allowed the business teams to have that level of agility and control to craft new digital experiences inside the Uber app. And when we exited Uber, in 2022 to start Niti, it was sort of made a lot of sense to leverage a lot of that learning in how digital experiences, digital platforms get built, right? So that was sort of one of the reasons why we started Niti with the focus in that space, and of course that all happened after moving back to India. And there is a bit of a story around there are two aspects to the one is all digital experience, and the second is digital public infrastructure, which certainly I can talk about as well.
Awesome. That is super interesting story. I think, as you said, I think you were chasing learning, and I think that has kind of led you to catching up with the trends, right? And technology. I think technology is transforming multiple industries. You kind of caught up with the right trends at the right time. The other point you mentioned is working with the smartest people. I think that's the best thing you could do in your life, I feel, because rather than chasing companies, if you chase the right people, I think your career kind of gets made. Hari, I want to address the elephant in the room. Uh, you were in the US, I think 15, 16 odd years, and coming back to India, right? I think we're seeing that a little bit more right now. But for me, I've not been to the US, I've not worked there. But for me, being in India, everybody aspires to be there, the land of dreams. You kind of can work at the best companies, kind of get the best education, and a lot of Indian community there as well. So you kind of not miss too much of India. Would love to hear your story. I'm sure listeners will be like, why did Hari come back? So would be
Yeah,
good to hear that.
it's certainly much more of a. I think it's becoming a more common phenomenon,
Yeah,
and that's great, right? I have almost I have a lot of friends that either have returned back or aspire to return. Uh,
nice.
but if I just zoom back and think about it, the set of reasons that you go to the US for, right, and that made you make that transition and leave India, there comes a point where there is diminishing returns of on each of those dimensions, right? So this could be career, it could be financial well-being, it could be working on great technology. These are typically reasons that people cite that they want to go to the US.
Correct.
But as you think about it, the growth story is now in India. The kind of technology companies that operate in India and the kind of work that happens in those companies, including that of Uber. And Uber has had a global engineering team that didn't build for India, it built for the world, right? So the kind of problems that today a lot of global tech companies that have their development centers set up in India, they solve globally relevant problems. They work on cutting edge of technology. So, and I think there are two types of uh, friends that I actually had that were that from that had moved from India, right? A set of people that actually were integrated to the culture in the US and very quickly over the course of maybe half a decade, or the other set of people that always had that connection to India, right?
Mm,
So be it pop culture, be it music, be it movies, your sort of thread of connection is always there with India. You keep traveling back to India every
correct.
year or every couple of years, and so therefore you never integrated into the society in the US, right?
Mm,
Therefore,
mm.
moving back to India was always on the cards. And when it happened, it was so seamless. It just made a
Oh,
lot of sense that the reasons that you moved to the US no longer are as strong a reason to stay there. And
mm,
therefore, being back in India, being where this, it felt like the action is in India, right?
mm.
And there is a lot of element of what I do with iSPIRT and other things, which also motivated me to believe that the action is in India, right? And therefore, we'll certainly unpack more of that as we talk. Uh,
Nee, nee, awesome, Hari. I think good that you said that a lot of people are considering coming back. I think it's brain gain now for India. People have gone there, got their experience, got their education, and coming back. I think it's amazing for the Indian economy. And as you rightly pointed out, India is in that growth phase now in terms of digital technology and a lot of other parameters as well, right? So I think seems like the right time to be here and build. And I think shout out to folks in the US to reach out to Hari to figure out how to come back to India and kind of integrate seamlessly. Hari, moving on to my next thing, I think obviously you touched upon briefly on your experience at iSpirit. Would be good to hear your experience till date with iSpirit and the initiatives you're working on. Would be good to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, iSpirit is a small organization, right? But with immense intelligence and people that are like motivated to make a difference. They talk
Mm.
about this Dunbar's limit of 150 people that you can really know well, and I think that
Yeah,
over a period of time, that makes sense. That we will know everybody. That I mean, so if you ask me, do I know everybody at iSpirit? I probably won't. But I think the theory is that like you have a very small set of people that are very motivated by something, and
yeah,
that they want to make a difference. A lot of them are entrepreneurs themselves. I would also say in some sense many of them are deshbhakts, right? They really want uh,
yeah, yeah,
the great things to happen for the country, right? And they want India to be that superpower in the next decade. So iSpirit is just fascinating as an organization that way. And I'm not sure how much you know of the story of the India stack, right, is pretty fascinating as well. And this has been very widely written and talked
yeah,
about in other podcasts. The story of Rajni, right? So Rajni is this fruit vendor that actually takes a intraday, loan of say 1,000 rupees, pays 50 rupees upfront as interest, right? So 5 to 10% interest per day, right? Which is like a huge margin. And then she's able to make enough profit for the day so that she can feed her family. But the next day she has to come back and take that 1,000 rupees for it, right? So the motivation for all of the India stack innovation like Aadhaar, eKYC, and including UPI, right? Like
yeah,
offering zero cost instant settlement is mind blowing. I mean, I came from the US and landed here, where and then being able to just travel. I mean, this was say 2017, 18, 19. 2017, 18, 19 end is when I moved back to India. But it was just fascinating to just go to any corner of India
yeah,
and then be able to pay at UPI. And even though those were initial days of UPI, you could still see the clear trajectory that
yeah.
the India stack technology was having an impact on. So
Absolutely.
it was unbelievable to see that sort of an impact. And iSpirit talks about how they like bring together, right, a Bangalore, Mumbai, and Delhi in execution. So policy, right, technology, which is Bangalore, and market, which is Mumbai, right? So how they bring together these three people across these three cities to execute on the projects that are most impactful for India.
Got it. No, yeah, I've been following iSpirit for some time, and I think phenomenal people, as you said, coming from quite established backgrounds as being an entrepreneur or being educated in the US, and coming back and actually really want to build for India in the truest sense. I think bunch of folks who are super motivated to make India a superpower. I think with those intentions, I think more powers to iSpirit. Hari, would like to know more about your initiative that you are heading at iSpirit as a volunteer. I believe it's DEPA. So it would be good if you could just unpack it to our listeners in a simple way, if possible, on
Yeah.
the initiative and maybe touch upon the challenges and execution till date.
Sure. So, I can give you the short version or the long version. So, and usually the short version, the long version is much more of a story, and therefore it seems ends up being more interesting. So I'll try the long version.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So okay, so I was, if you remember, I talked about I started my career building the Linux kernel and TCP/IP, right? So all that stuff. And if you think about it, and I said there is a connection between that and what I do with DEPA as well. If you think about all of the internet economy and the SaaS economy, particularly right in India, and India has actually immensely benefited. They're all built on top of Linux, right? Right? Linux being the operating system that really opened up the cost of building cloud, that has made possible all these public infrastructure clouds today, like Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google GCP, and made possible SaaS to be built out of India, right? And a TCP/IP, which I think is, you could say the same thing about TCP/IP as opening up the internet economy, right? Otherwise, countries like India wouldn't have been able to participate in the economic prosperity that actually has come to the country.
True.
Now, if you think about what is common between these two, it's actually open source and open protocols, right? and that allows the cost of technology to come drastically down. It allows for innovation to happen on top of that, right? And if you think about just hold that thought for a minute, that open networks and open source actually holds a huge promise in democratizing, right, things and opening innovation. Now, if you think about that same sort of a concept from the point of view of open networks in India, um, this UPI is an example of that. UPI is an example of an open network that is interoperable, that actually allows for innovation to happen on top of it, which happened for the payments space. So if you look at India stack, there are three layers of the stack that we talk about. The bottommost layer is the identity layer, that's Aadhaar, eKYC, eSign, which allows us to have a digital presence, right? This second layer is UPI, which is how money moves, and really we have innovated in that space by having real-time settlement, zero cost, near zero MDR as well, right? Like people are talking about launching credit on top of UPI at scale, which is going to be phenomenal in terms of what it can do to access to credit through the UPI rail. Now, the topmost layer of that India stack is the data stack, right? And when it comes to data, data is the new oil, right? That's what people have been continually saying. And the data economy is actually estimated to be a $15 trillion industry. The top 10 Fortune 100 companies are data companies. And many of our day-to-day lives in what we do, whether we realize or not, are influenced by ML models, right? ML models are running in the background that serve the right ads to you. They help you search through a lot of content to surface the right sort of intelligence. And if you think about this economy, this data economy that you think about, India actually produces tremendous amount of data, right? Like Indians are voracious consumers of digital services. There is a large digital exhaust that happens from any of this digital consumption. And if you think about in that digital economy, India is a large exporter of data, right? As in, just like how back in the day, in the colonial days, India actually stopped producing, or, under the colonial regime, India stopped producing clothing and textiles and started exporting the raw materials back to Manchester. And then the West was producing the great costumes and textiles, and then exporting that the rest of the world. You could think of the same thing happening in the data space, right? India is actually producing a lot of data, but can you name me one Indian company that actually produces phenomenal models, ML models, right? Because if you think about the value chain of data, the value is created and retained by the companies that produce the models. That's where the value is, right? Not the data. The data itself is something that we export today in hordes, because it's the large advertising companies of the West who have largest market shares in that. These are walled gardens. The data that enters those systems, they're able to phenomenally create a lot of value, right, out of those data sets. But that value remains outside of India, right? Those ML models that the likes of Facebook or Google or Apple or any of the other companies produce, they don't find their way back to India in terms of their value, right? So if we could do something today that would make a huge impact and a meaningful impact to the country, that would be making sure that we are building technology that captures that value and keeps that value in India from data systems.
Got it. So, as you mentioned, I think recently the NVIDIA CEO also mentioned that India should be the AI factory of the world, rather than exporting data and somebody else kind of adding value to that and importing it. India should be doing it end to end, right? I think you rightly mentioned.
So let's unpack that a little bit further, right? So if you think about data sets, right, that are of value, so the public data sets are already out there, and there are, there is OpenAI, and there is, Llama, and there are Mistral, and there are so many multimodal AI models that have been built out of public data sets. Now, is that a space that India should compete in? Because the differentiation when it comes to having public data sets and you're building models on top of it, the person that is going to win is somebody who has the deepest pockets, right? Because that then it's a matter of throwing compute at the problem
Yep.
and
Yeah.
in assimilating all of the data and producing better and better models, right? That's a game that India would never be able to play, because if you think about the Middle East, think of the West, they will be able to, they have deeper pockets than India, and they'll always be able to do it better. Where India can win in this data economy is when it comes to private data sets, right? So if you think about Indian organizations, we have some of the best data sets when it comes to healthcare data. We have some of the best data sets when it comes to transportation data. We have some of the best data sets when it comes to supply chain data, right? And these are examples where if you talk about the government e-marketplace has tremendous amount of data sets for, and government is the biggest procurer in the country, right? If you think about IRCTC, they have some of the biggest transportation data sets and supply chain data sets. If you think about the health organizations, health research organizations, and the hospitals in India, they have some of the best data sets when it comes to diagnostic research that people would want. So those are the sort of uh, uh, gold mines, if you will, right? That we haven't unlocked yet. Nobody in the world has access to that data. So if we are able to successfully and securely unlock those data sets while retaining the privacy of the data individual, right? Not leaking the privacy of the individual, if we can unlock it at scale. So the reason privacy is important is because, let's say if I have to go ask permission with, millions of customers to actually unlock the data set, that is never going to happen, right? So you need mechanisms, you need a process, you need a, what we'll talk about as a techno-legal approach. We need the technology and the legal boundaries within which the technology can operate, to be able to unlock these private data sets, because that is the largest value, that's the gold mine of data that is India sitting on. And if we are able to successfully unlock it, then the kind of value that Indian companies can generate on top of that can rival any global company.
Awesome. Got it. So, Hari, what I understood is obviously you're going to, as you mentioned, it's a techno-legal, the DEPA that you're working on is a techno-legal kind of a policy. So you're kind of figuring out the process and the obviously the legal aspect on how you could unlock data or unlock value out of these private data sets, right? I mean, in bottom line, this is what you're working on, right?
That's what DEPA does. So, so why has not happened today, right? So if you think about these large private data sets that are there, why are these, and we call them a latent data marketplace. So there is a marketplace that's possible. And in order for you to safely unlock this data sets, it has not happened at scale for various reasons, even though the marketplace is actually primed and ready to go. Let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say if you think about an average Indian citizen today, they are actually fairly sophisticated in the digital experiences that they consume. I mean,
Correct.
the aspiration phone is the iPhone, right? People still want that sort of an experience, right? They have adopted ChatGPT, right? So the Indian consumer is actually ready. The Indian enterprises are actually increasingly catering to the consumer, right? So a lot of our physical supply chains are getting digitized. A lot of our physical services are actually getting digitized. So businesses actually want to cater much better digital products, experiences, for which they need data. They need much better data to be able to, they need to legally obtain this data, and they need to be able to do this in a privacy preserving manner. And they're also willing to pay for this. Now, the problem is that the enterprises, the large enterprises that actually are sitting on these large data corpus, in order for them to unlock this data and share with this data with a smaller company that might want to train their ML model and train models on this data. Let's take an example, right? So let's take an example of maybe a Swiggy or a Flipkart that has tons of data around maybe how their merchants actually acquire, or say a Misho that has these homepreneurs, right? They have home entrepreneurs that actually buy stuff off of Misho and sell, distribute locally. There is tons of data that these companies might have, which is related to cash flow and flow of goods within these systems, which might allow a bank or an NBFC to be able to underwrite and extend credit to a Misho homepreneur who might not have a thick credit file, right? But the problem is, in order for Misho to do that, they might not want to share the data with an NBFC because they don't know how that data will be used.
Correct.
The
Yeah.
privacy of the individual might get leaked. There is also business and trade secret information embedded in that data, right? So they are also they're not very comfortable sharing this data with
Mm.
with an outside entity to be able to unlock the value. Now, if we are able to do that in a secure and privacy preserving manner, where the provider of the data is monetized from that transaction, from that sharing,
Mm.
but
Mm.
they're guaranteed that no amount of privacy of the individual or any of the business trade secrets of that entity will not be leaked,
Mm.
then we actually can create this data marketplace. So there is this latent marketplace that we can unfreeze and allow for data sharing to happen between entities that have large amounts of private data, entities that want to tap into the data set to be able to models. And remember, we talked about ML models or the value, right, in that data ecosystem. So you can actually unlock value by building ML models. And then you can also benefit the end consumer here, because the end consumer here is going to get access to services and credit and any other thing that they are today unable to get, because we actually unfreeze this data marketplace. That's when the magic would happen. And that's what DEPA is trying to do.
Oh, awesome. And I can just imagine once you unlock this, you can't even imagine the value that you can generate. It's so many layers can be built by, or as you said, smaller companies to maybe train ML models, create multiple set of applications that even the consumer can't even imagine right now. I think once you unlock this private data sets, I can just imagine the value that you will generate. I just wanted to maybe unpack a little bit more. Has this policy come through? Just want to understand whether has it been executed? Have you guys done a POC? Just want to understand DEPA's progress so far.
Absolutely. Great question. So I think we are actually sitting at the at a very important moment, right, for DEPA to happen. So in 2023, last year, um, let me take a step back. So we talked about how DEPA is a techno-legal approach, right? So there is a technical aspect to it, and there is a legal aspect to it. And the legal aspect to it is the precursor to the technical aspect, because it actually legitimizes everything that the technology is trying to do, right? And in India, in order for you to enforce something, just legal is always insufficient, because at scale you can't enforce legal things in India, but technology can enforce it, right? So that's why techno legal approaches are actually very powerful in how they scale to in a nation like India, right? And then if you can scale it to India, you can actually scale it to any other country, which is why digital public infrastructure that's built in India is going overseas as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
coming back to DEPA, what the momentous occasion that happened, in 2023 was the historical data privacy bill, right? That was signed and became law, signed by our honorable president and became law. And comparable, this is comparable to GDPR, right? So GDPR is is the global data protection rights bill that is in effect in the European Union, enforced across the globe wherever enterprises actually do business with the EU, right? And the DPDP, which is the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, is the equivalent in India, which both empowers the consumer with the data that they own, as well as protects the rights of the customer, right? And the data is a 13 under 20 page bill that I would highly recommend everybody to read. Very flexibly authored, for a lot of innovation to happen from a technology perspective, to come and unlock the value from the data sets we talked about in a privacy preserving manner, where the value can also be extended back to the data principle. So for instance, in this case, if you what you ideally want is you want these private data sets to get unlocked, value to be created, but also the end citizens who actually contributed to the data set to also be able to derive some benefit out of the data, right? So that is DEPA. So DEPA is the technology part of the techno-legal framework, where we have now a open source implementation. So think of it as public infrastructure, and always India's DPI is privately provisioned public infrastructure, right? So if you think about the UPI rails, UPI protocol is public, operated by NPCI, but the implementations of that is all private, right? So there are acquirers and on the consumer side, people that actually make the payments, that are all private companies. So similarly, DEPA is public infrastructure, open source software, which allows you to now take it's a model implementation of how a data provider can share data with the data consumer for the purpose of model training. And these data sets come together in what we call a secure enclave, where the models come and visit the enclave, the data is pulled into the enclave, and then training of that model happens. The model weights are taken back by the data provider because that is the only value that they are looking for.
Yeah.
And then this ephemeral enclave that gets created is destroyed at the end of their operation. Right? So you're completely preserved the privacy and the secrets of that data itself. And now the model itself is the biggest value that you're unlocking. And that is the implementation of the DEPA protocol that we have put out there. I would encourage people to go to http://depa.world, where all of this source code, all of the documentation related to it is all available. And we are in the POC stage of the project where we are actively engaging with the ecosystem, three major players in the ecosystem: data providers, data consumers, and a new breed of technology service providers that are actually entering the space. So think of these as data analytics companies that want to build the next sort of unicorn out of India, right? When it comes to data analytics, right? These companies are actually now starting to look at how to build tech in this space so they can bring together infrastructure. They can put together infrastructure, either cloud-based or on-prem based infrastructure, where data can come together in this secure enclave. Training and model training can happen, and they can automate a lot of these by simplifying this implementation. So we could take it to many organizations across India. So there won't be 10 models. There would be, thousands of ML models for niche use cases that can power very specific businesses, and those businesses can add value, create value for the country.
Super cool, if you ask me. I think this platform that you're building, I'm a big fan of digital public infrastructure, as you said. I think this layer is, I think, cutting across so many different functions, so many different disciplines. I think value can be created in each and every part of the value chain, right? So I think beautiful. It's a big shout out to the folks, as Hari mentioned. As you mentioned, data producers, data consumers, and I think that middle layer, the data analytics companies, I think their startups in India can really leverage and kind of create some interesting ML models. Folks, I'll put Hari mentioned the URL. I'll put that in the comment sections. Hari, moving on. I think I wanted to just quickly touch upon your experience so far at Niti. Uh, I mean, with your experience so far in the US, presently working on DEPA with iSPIRT, just want to quickly pick your brain on what you're doing at Niti. I believe it's an embedded finance company. Just a quick overview of Niti would be great for the audience.
Absolutely. So when Arvind and Arvind is my co-founder, when we came back to India, it was 2019 is when we came back to India. One of the things that we were just blown away by, right, is the fintech infrastructure that was there in place in India. I mean, things like real-time settlement, same day, open banking data, which is account aggregator, right? So this is permissioned access to data, so that you are now able to, without a paper trail, all goes back to that vision of Rajni, right? Like the vision the vision with which India Stack has operated is that if you're able to build something for that intraday loan for Rajni, everybody else in the way will benefit, right? You and I will benefit, but as long as the vision is actually on Rajni, right? So we're just blown away by the amount of financial service infrastructure that was there in place, the open banking infrastructure that was in place in India. And coming from the US, where it's a very closed banking infrastructure, if you will, we actually felt that if we wanted to build something on our own, building in the financial services space was actually a huge opportunity in India because of the tech forward regulators that were there in place. There was a huge focus on compliance in this market. I mean, we have seen that in the last several years, how the regulator has come and always tried to protect the interest of the end consumer. We felt that that was a huge drawback in the industry from a fintech standpoint, because the fintechs are trying to innovate, and they are really looking for guardrails within which they could innovate, which ensures that they're actually going to be on the right side of innovation at all times, right? So what we believe is that the next generation of, like, that India is overdue for the next generation of financial service products. If you think about, if you go to any of the traditional financial institutions, they have a handful of products, and that is not going to meet the needs of the hugely credit starved country, both from particularly from an SME and MSME perspective. Very low penetration of wealth products in India, and extremely low penetration of insurance, right, in India.
Insurance, yeah.
So the next set of underbanked and underinsured and people in India that don't have a good retirement plan, right? Therefore, wealth is important. That is going to happen through innovative products, financial service products that are constructed. And those products will have to be constructed by digital native companies, right? Because they understand the consumer well. The banks will have the best access to cost of capital. They are the regulated entities, and they have to be a huge part of this product creation. Therefore, what we envision at Niti is there needs to be the next generation of financial service infrastructure that allows for the digital platforms and the banks or the regulated financial institutions to come together and build these products in a collaborative manner, in a highly compliant manner, but also in a manner that is provides great customer experience and digital experiences, because the modern, Gen Z and millennials in India are used to that sort of an experience, right? So none of these can be compromised, and we believe that these financial products will actually be contextually embedded. Therefore, they're almost transparent in the way that they're delivered to you, right? So when you do a payment today, like the classic example here is a bit self-serving is Uber itself, right? When you actually take the Uber ride and walk, get off the auto and walk away, where the payment just happens transparently, there is financial services getting rendered there that you don't even see, right?
Yeah.
So we believe that that's how the next generation of wealth, so micro savings, micro investing, micro insurance, the next generation of products is going to be very seamless, very transparent, and it will happen in the workflow of what a consumer already does, or it will happen in the workflow of what a small business already does, right? So the platforms that serve a small business will have that right working capital loan pop up to them at the right time with the best interest rate, right? So that is the vision of embedded finance. And in order for that to actually happen in the country, you need platforms like Niti, that what we are building at Niti, to actually become a reality. So we are building one such embedded finance platform that, with the aim of bringing the next generation of financial service products to India on top of India stack. So things like ONDC financial services, Oken, account aggregator, UPI, credit on UPI. These are very, very relevant underlying infrastructure that has been created, and we are building on the shoulders of this to bring the next generation of products to the country.
Hari, I think it's so awesome to hear you're kind of stitching all these already available infrastructure, right? And kind of creating products on top. I think very important point that you mentioned. I think folks like Rajni, going back to the Rajni example, I think in the end of the day, need some good savings, wealth creation products. You need insurance, you need loan. Typically, once you have these three layers to that level, to the Rajnis of the world, to the security guards, to the Uber drivers of the world, once you get them on this stack, automatically all your KPIs in terms of penetration and usage automatically increases. So, Hari, more power to you. It's awesome to hear you're stitching all this infrastructure. I'm a big fan of DPI. More powers to you to take it globally. I think folks like you, once you kind of figure out the India kind of environment, just I think go big, go global. Hari, kind of moving on to my last, I think we have discussed quite a bit, and thanks to kind of explaining all these kind of heavy topics in a simple way, Hari. So I'm sure listeners out there will definitely kind of reach out to you now. Moving on to my last and kind of my theme of my podcast is what's next, right? I think you have nicely kind of integrated your learnings in the US, coming back to India, understanding the nuances here. Kind of you were blown away with the already existing fintech infra, leverage that, and now you've kind of built Niti on top of it. and your experience at iSpirit. Would be good to hear your thoughts on the next 5-10 years in the fintech infra, because you have had maximum exposure there. Maybe in the fintech infra and maybe the data, the private data set infra. Just want to hear your thoughts as last parting comments.
Sure. So I think there's a few things that I think um, that will happen at scale in India in the next, say, half a decade to a decade. Um, the first thing is just like what account aggregator has been able to do for permission data access from a financial institution to a non-financial institution. The next big wave is going to be where you're able to tap into what used to be called alternate data, right? But alternate data is just digital trail that is left, but it's alternate from the standpoint of a traditional financial institution because they just rely on credit scores today, right? So India is still a massively credit hungry nation, right? In order for you to do business, in order for you to have working capital, in order for you to mobilize supply chains, in order for you to enable a small business owner to actually have the capital so that they can stock their store with the right thing for Diwali, right? All of this actually is a hugely credit hungry nation. The relevance of private data, permissioned access to private data, uh, in a platform that can safely unlock the data, in order for you to build the next generation of products is actually going to happen, right? Just like and what that means there will be a explosion of new sort of products that are very well suited, that are hyper personalized to the needs of the consumer. That could be a retail customer from a bank's point of view, or it could be a business customer, right? So corporate customer. So that is going to happen. The second thing that I'm very bullish on is that the we're a very young nation, right? And we are and as the what they call the middle, right, or the lower middle as part of the economy moves to the middle part of the economy and the middle class, the set of the definitely consumption is going to increase. Therefore, consumption related financial service products will be big, but also their needs, their higher order needs for being able to save for their kids education, save for that wedding that they always planned, right? So a huge explosion in terms of wealth building capabilities, as well as of course the ultimate aspect of that is actually protection, right? Because people think in that that is the sequence of thinking, right? Like your earlier needs are usually related to credit, then it's
Mm.
about building wealth and
Mm.
prosperity, and then
Correct.
finally you start thinking about protection because now you have created and you want to make sure that you retain the lifestyle. I think that's the progression that I see that India will, as India becomes more and more prosperous. I deeply believe in the India story. I deeply believe the next decade or the next 2 decades is India's decade. And as we grow our people that are, we have kind of gone from below the poverty line to above the poverty line now. But as we go from people that have a very low monthly salary to monthly salary where they can afford to start saving more, where they can afford to now consuming more luxury, right? I think there is going to
Mm.
be a explosion of financial service products that cut across lending to wealth to protection, right? Insurance. I think that is going to happen. And anybody that is building in the fintech space in India, they have a solid foundation of financial service infrastructure delivered through DPI. And I'm excited to just be a small part of this.
Awesome. Very super exciting times. I think I totally resonate to what you're saying. I think the infrastructure, the foundation is quite well established. I think that's going to get stronger. And because of that, you can have a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of fintech startups coming in and kind of building this hyper personalized products for particular use cases. Hari, I'm super excited on this journey. Wishing you and the team all the very best. I think on that note, Hari, thanks a lot for being part of What's Next with Me. I learned so much, and I hope listeners out there can kind of assimilate all this, absorb all this, and kind of be part of this, as you mentioned, India's decade of technology. Hari, once again, thanks for being part of What's Next with Me.
Lovely being on the podcast, and thanks for having me, and wonderful meeting all of your viewers through this. And if there are people that resonate with the ideas and want to reach out to me, my email is hari, Hari at niti.ai, niti.ai. feel free to reach out. Would love to understand what you do and synergize on aspects of what you do.